As the goddess Vega descends, she says to Ojin, "O heaven-defying star, the prophesied savior of a soon-to-be doomed world, you are the regressor, huh?" With a look of bewilderment he could only think, what the fuck is this lady even talking about? I am a regressor? Who the fuck is this regressor? Because I certainly haven't regressed before. Is this lady a glowing nutcase? As the scene changes to Ojin's past, Ojin, you are an orphan. You have to understand your situation better and listen to everything I say. As this old baldy tries to calm the young Ojin, he says, to fool others is quite simple. You have to make them hear and see the things that they want, and thus they will create their own illusions inside their made-up delusions. As the old man with the gleaming bald head smiles and says, "So Ojin, how about it? Do you think that you can make that happen?" With a cocky expression on the young Ojin's face, he just smirks and doesn't say a word. He just flips him off with a fully erected bird. For the young Ojin, at the age of 8 years old, he lived in an orphanage that made him scam others for the benefit of the orphanage director. After the old man quits beating Ojin, he wipes the sweat off his face and says, "Okay Ojin, say that one more time, what kind of place is this orphanage?" Sprawled out on the floor, he opens one eye and flips him off again and grins and says, "A good place." The old man loses his temper and a vein bulges on his gleaming dome and says, "Ho, you fucking brat. Just because I am being nice." As he starts rolling up his sleeves and starts bellowing, "Do you want to die too?" But before he could even finish his lecture, a young girl came flying up behind him yelling, "Don't bully Ojin, baldy," and smashes the old man in the balls with a swift kick. This makes the old man instantly keel over and flop onto the ground. With sweat of his bald head, he barely squeals out, "You little shits! Get back here! And how many times do I have to tell you? I'm not bald yet," making the kids scurry away. This is Song Haun at the age of 10. She was the only reason why the young Ojin was able to endure his hellish life during his time at the orphanage. He was always made to spew bullshit about the director to make him sound like a great man, but in reality the director would just beat everyone to the point where it wouldn't leave any marks. That is when he had the thought that he couldn't die a dog's death in a shithole like the orphanage. But fortunately or unfortunately that was also the time that the gates opened up all around the world, and along with the monsters that came spewing out of them that no one has ever seen or even heard of before, but just as the entire world has turned into a hellscape. That is when the Celestials appeared, holding the power of the constellations, granting their stigmas to certain individuals to wield their power. Later, they were known as Awakeners, but for Ojin, living in this world was easier than living in the orphanage. As the scene changes, it brings us to the current day, where Ojin was walking away from an Awakener while wiping some sweat off, saying, "Thanks for your hard work," while the red-headed guy laughs joyously and says, "You as well, Mr. Gino, will you be at the next gate as well?" As Ojin turns around and smiles deviously and says, "Of course I'll be there." But inwardly he thought, how could I leave and not scam these fat sheep? Ojin came up with an alias to scam Awakeners that was known as Gino. He would do his best to drain all their hard work, their blood and sweat like a sloppy fat leech, by joining them acting as a high-ranking Awakener. He would trick other Awakeners, by acting like he would support them as the rear guard, and after making a decent cut from the spoils he would split, and just like today, he would pick out a pushover like any other day. This unlucky fool was Lee Shinhyuk, as Shinhyuk bellows out in surprise, "What? You are an apostle of Aquarius?" As he stutters, "Isn't that one of the 12 zodiacs?" With a devious grin, Ojin laughs it off and says, "You don't need to be that surprised." As he rubs the back of his head sheepishly and says, "It might be one of the zodiacs, but I am only a 1-star apostle." But in reality, Ojin isn't even an Awakener. He believed that he became the perfect scammer, the scammer of scammers. Shinhyuk then says, "Man, one of the 12 zodiacs. I am nothing compared to one of them. I am just an apostle of Pixis." Ojin goes with the flow and says very enthusiastically, "Wow! An apostle of Pixis? Isn't that the stigma that has control over all directions of a compass? And it also gives the ability to wield any weapon with complete mastery?" Shinhyuk just laughs with embarrassment and says, "It's not that big of a deal." Ojin just smirks and thinks, That's it, what a fool. Now that I have my prey, let's begin. As he tries to put on his most amiable smile and says, my name is Gwon Jino. It must have been fate that we have met like this. We should form a party? Confused, Shin-hyuk tilts his head to the side and says, sure, I would be happy to team up. But, why would you want to team up with someone like me? Ojin just rubs the back of his head embarrassingly and says, well, you see I'm not that good with controlling my stigma, even though I have been a 1-star for over a year now. Ojin then smiles and pulls down his shirt and says, even though it's a little embarrassing, but let's show off our stigmas. Which makes Shin-hyuk blurts out, oh my god. That is one of the 12 zodiac stigma. Ojin couldn't help but chuckle and think, this fool would never be able to figure out that this is a fake because he engraved the mark on his chest with a knife. Ojin turns and looks at Shin-hyuk, which is smiling happily, and says, this is a low-ranking gate, but we should still be careful just in case because it still has a high lethality rate. Shin-hyuk just nods with enthusiasm. As they march through the gate, Ojin says to Shin-hyuk, now then, Mr. Shin-hyuk, I will give you a buff before we head into battle. As he thinks in his head, now then let's begin the performance, shall we? Ojin activates a micro's LED and starts chanting, Celestial Aquarius, heed my call, please shine a starlight that brightens up the darkest of roads for this humble apostle. Just as he finished his chant, the daylight of the lake with a mixture of fluorescent paint with ground-up glass, he sprinkles it onto Shin-hyuk's head like it was some magical pixie dust and says, good, you're all good to go now. After the so-called buff was all said and done, Shin-hyuk gets all perked up and says, wow. This is the so-called power of the Aquarius's stigma? I can feel it. My body feels light, and I can feel my body explode with energy as if it is coming alive. Thank you, Mr. Jino. I will now show you my strength. Just as he take off, Ojin couldn't help but scoff inside his head, is this guy an idiot? Did he just eat the glass dust and says he's full of energy? That can't be good for him. As he blasted forward slaying all the monsters, he couldn't help but blurt out in the midst of battle, I can really feel it. I can feel this great buff deep inside my bones. After Shin-hyuk had killed off all the monsters, Ojin came running up and with a dazzling smile and a wave and says, I will go and clean up the monsters and pick up all the starstone. As he sets off he couldn't help but think that this guy is pretty skilled, maybe I could earn a fortune off of him today. As he is picking up all the starstones, he looks at the starstone in his hand and couldn't help but think, even though these stones can be used by infusing their stigma into them, but there is no way I would let anyone else pick up my income. While Ojin was busy frolicking around happily, picking up all the stones, he had failed to notice that his surroundings had become suspiciously quiet, deathly quiet. Just then he hears Shin-hyuk stuttering in panic off to the side, so he looks over and notices his pale countenance. He then looks around with urgency, only to notice that they were completely surrounded by monsters. By this time Shin-hyuk finally quits stuttering and asks the question, why are there so many ant horns? As Ojin stares into the eyes of the beast, it was at that moment that he knew that something has gone wrong. As they turn around to run, Shin-hyuk yells, this way, Mr. Jino. As Ojin was running he couldn't help but wonder, what the fuck is going on? He has been going in and out of these low-level gates for a very long time, but this was the first time that so many monsters have gathered together all at once. As they were booking it down the forest with the ant horns right on their tails, Shin-hyuk couldn't help but cry out loud, damn it! They're too fast! They are gaining on us. We can't lose them at this rate. As Shin-hyuk turns his head, yelling in panic and looks at Ojin. Just then Ojin had a terrible feeling in his gut. With a look of shock and disbelief, he could only think, this fucking bastard is looking at me, no way, he isn't going to. As if his premonition had came true, he found a boot in front of his face. Unable to dodge, he gets smashed in the face from Shin-hyuk's boot and sent flying towards the monsters. Only to barely hear Shin-hyuk's voice getting further and farther away saying in a regretful tone, I'm sorry. As Ojin gets back up in a daze, he instantly felt rage build up from within him and he bellows out, you son of a bitch. I'll fucking kill you. Coming back to his senses for a moment, and came to a realization. With fear, he slowly turns his head and could only say, "Oh fuck." As he gets up and starts running once again, he sees Shin-hyuk crying out once again, "At this rate both of us will die." Ojin only responded by saying, "You fucking pussy. Let's die together then, you little bitch." And as if the heavens had felt Ojin's rage, Shin-hyuk gets blasted with a bright light that makes him scream like he's dying. Looking at this scene before him, Ojin was so dumbfounded he forgot to keep running and could only think, "What the fuck? What the hell is wrong with this bastard?" As he starts rummaging through Shin-hyuk's shit and cursing to himself, "You fucking piece of shit. If you're just going to die, you have to at least have something useful on you." Just then he noticed a stigma that wasn't Pixis's on his chest and mutters, "What the fuck?" As he drags his hand over it and thinks, "Isn't this the constellation of Lyra?" Out of nowhere, followed by a ding, a prompt appeared in front of Ojin's face saying, "Black Heaven has begun its first awakening." And then she appeared, saying I was a regressor. Like, what the hell is she talking about? Like, is she talking about someone coming from the future? What future? My future is going to end in less than 5 minutes from now, from these mutts behind me. The goddess Vega just stares at Ojin questioningly, but he was still lost in his own thoughts, thinking to himself, "She said that I possess her stigma, that she hasn't given it out to anyone before." But wait, wasn't her stigma just on Shin-hyuk's chest just a moment ago, holding his chest tightly from the stress? And thought to himself, "I have no clue how this all happened, but I somehow used this ability called Black Heaven and had absorbed the dead Shin-hyuk's stigma." But it wasn't Shin-hyuk Pix's stigma, it was Lyra. Wait. Then that means... As he looks back at the dead Shin-hyuk's body and thinks, doesn't that mean that Shin-hyuk was a regressor? Just before Shin-hyuk died, he lit up like a Christmas tree. But that also happened to me as well when I absorbed his stigma. Still looking at his dead body, startled, and thought, after that, the Black Heaven has transferred the stigma to me. Feeling determined, he couldn't help but think, I don't know why all this has happened, but... The goddess, tired of the silence, starts complaining, "Why are you not answering me? Are you not the regressor? Because I definitely felt the Heaven-defying Star's presence from here." Coming out of his daze and says, "You are right." As he slowly gets up from the ground and with a clear mind, in order to get out of this situation alive, he will have to do what he does best. As he stands up straight with a look of determination, he blurts out, as if he is even trying to convince himself, "I am a regressor." And as if there were imaginary birds chirping in the background, Vega just stares at Ojin as if he were an idiot, and with a deadpan face she just hums. She just folds her arms across his chest and bobs her head up and down, smiling, and says, "Just as I thought, you're definitely the Heaven-defying Star." Ojin just bobs his head up and down in return and says, "Yes, yes, that is right," while inwardly thinking, "Holy fuck. Did she actually fall for it?" Trying to keep a straight face from not bursting out and start laughing, to think, a being who possesses a power that no mere mortal would ever dare to oppose, and here I am, scamming a godlike existence. There is no way that I would die from this, right? Vega cuts off his train of thought and says, "Oh my, I would like to have a long chat with you about the future that you have experienced. But there seems to be some trivial things in the way." With a smile that is so bright that it could light up the surroundings plastered on her face, and says, "This esteemed one is looking forward to see how strong the power of the Heaven-defying Star is." And with a stiff face, Ojin turns his head creakily and looks back with horror and says, "So what you're saying is I..." As Ojin goes pale with sweat dripping down his face and says, "I'll deal with them and show you my power?" With a sweat giggle, Vega then says, "Foo foo foo, yes, and go all out. You don't have to worry about me." Ojin could only cry inwardly and thought to himself, that is totally not what I'm worried about. God damn it.